The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, spilling soft golden light across the polished marble floors. Laughter and clinking glasses filled the air, a symphony of joy that everyone expected me to share. But my stomach, twisted with a heavy knot, a silent dread I had carried for months, knowing my sister had a way of turning every moment into a stage for her cruelty. Today at her wedding, it was worse than I ever imagined. It began subtly, the way she smiled too sweetly when I entered the room. Guests whispered polite greetings, but their eyes flicked toward me with curiosity I didn't welcome. I had tried to dress modestly, hoping to blend into the background, to be invisible among the 120 elegantly dressed attendees. But my sister, she had other plans. "Look at you," she said, her voice laced with false sweetness as she circled me like a predator. "Still the same shy little shadow, huh?" I forced a smile, hoping my parents would intervene, even slightly. But they didn't. Instead, they chuckled lightly, exchanging glances, as though they were sharing a private joke at my expense. The laughter sliced through me, sharper than any words my sister could have spoken. My heart pounded not with fear, but with the raw sting of betrayal. Before I could retreat, she stood before the microphone, calling attention to herself, and then to me. "And let's not forget my dear sister," she said, her tone dripping with condescension, "who always thought she was too quiet to matter." The guests turned toward me, eyes widening, some murmuring awkwardly. I froze, the words echoing in my mind like a cruel refrain. My cheeks burned. I felt the heat rise from the tips of my ears to the crown of my head. I wanted to vanish, to sink into the floorboards and escape the judgmental stares. My sister continued, weaving stories from my past embarrassing moments from childhood, school mishaps, and private humiliations she had clearly hoarded just for this occasion. Each anecdote was met with laughter from the crowd, and my parents, they clutched their hands to their mouths, trying not to laugh too loudly, but the amusement was unmistakable. It was surreal. I could hear my mother whispering, "She's always been so dramatic," as though my suffering were some form of comedy. My father's smile was wide, approving, satisfied. I realized then that I wasn't just humiliated. I was invisible to the people who were supposed to protect me, supposed to love me unconditionally. My sister had orchestrated this entire performance, and my parents were her willing audience. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I clenched my fists, digging my nails into my palms as the world seemed to tilt around me. Every whispered joke, every pointed laugh felt like knives. I wanted to scream, to expose her cruelty in front of everyone, but the words caught in my throat. The shame wrapped around me like a suffocating cloak, leaving me trembling but silent. Then the unthinkable happened. The groom, my sister's new husband, approached with a smile that was meant to be comforting, but he misjudged everything. "Don't mind her," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "She's always like this." The words were meant to soothe, but to me, they rang hollow. Even he had become part of the performance, acknowledging my sister's power while ignoring my pain. The whispers resumed, the laughter echoing like a cruel symphony that I could not escape. I retreated to a corner, my back pressed against the wall, the hum of conversation and music turning into a blur. I was invisible, humiliated, and utterly alone, yet beneath the hurt, something began to flicker, anger. Not the reckless anger of a child, but a slow, deliberate heat that promised one thing. I would not be crushed forever. Today I had lost, but I would remember, and one day I would rise. The days after the wedding passed like a cruel fog. The images of that night, the laughter, the whispers, my parents' approving smiles haunted me relentlessly. I avoided family gatherings, declined phone calls, and even stopped answering messages from distant relatives who had attended. The humiliation wasn't something that could be brushed off with time. It lingered, gnawing at the edges of my self-worth, turning every thought into a quiet echo of betrayal. My sister, of course, carried on as if nothing had happened. She reveled in the new attention from her husband, her in-laws, and friends who fawned over her. She didn't notice, or didn't care, that I had retreated from her orbit. Every social media post, every celebratory photo, felt like another reminder that she had triumphed over me publicly. My parents, too, continued their pattern of amusement, asking me to lighten up or take things less seriously. Their laughter had once been a comfort. Now it was a brand of cruelty sharper than any words my sister could have used. I tried to talk to friends outside the family, but the words never fully captured the depth of my humiliation. How could anyone understand the sharp edge of parental laughter when it's meant as support? How could they know the twisting shame of being mocked in front of 120 guests? The moment etched into the memory of so many, like a scar burned into the air. My shame was private, yet painfully public, and it created a loneliness that no one could bridge. Yet in the quiet of my room, alone with my thoughts, something began to stir. A small ember that neither my sister nor my parents could see. Anger, not the blind, impulsive anger of a child lashing out, but a measured, simmering heat. I realized that crying or confronting them in that moment would have been pointless. They had made their choice, to side with cruelty, to see my humiliation as entertainment. But I had another option. I could choose to rise, to transform that pain into power. I threw myself into my work, my studies, my ambitions. I surrounded myself with people who saw me, who valued me for more than my family's narrative. Every success, every recognition, was a tiny act of defiance. Each one whispered to the shadows of my humiliation, I am not broken. I am not small. At night, I would replay the wedding in my mind, not as a victim, but as a strategist. I imagined scenarios where the tables were turned, where my sister's laughter was replaced by the uncertainty of her own vulnerability. I planned quietly, knowing that revenge would not be hasty or petty, but precise and inevitable. It would not come from rash words or impulsive actions. It would come from me rising above the cruelty with patience and cunning. I also began to notice the subtle cracks in my parents' facade of amusement. My father's approval sometimes wavered. My mother's laughter occasionally faltered when faced with my quiet absence. I couldn't let them see the depth of my pain. They had dismissed it too easily, but I stored it in the corners of my mind, a silent ledger of all the moments they had failed me. One day, those failures would be revealed in ways they could not ignore. For now, I became invisible. But invisibility was my shield. I observed, I listened, I learned. Every word my sister spoke about me, every glance from my parents, became data, fodder for the plan I was constructing in silence. My humiliation had planted the seed of something far stronger than simple anger, a resolve to redefine myself entirely. By the time weeks had passed, I had resolved that no one would ever again have the power to make me feel small in such a public, cruel way. The laughter that had stung me so deeply would become my compass, guiding me toward a future where I would stand unshakable, commanding respect and attention, while my tormentors would be powerless. To diminish me, the silence that had once been my prison became my strategy. And in that silence, I began to transform. Time has a way of reshaping everything, molding pain into power if you let it. For months, maybe even years, I immersed myself in my own world, cutting away the expectations, the toxic judgments, and the laughter that had once defined me. I worked tirelessly, my education, my career, my skills, each success a quiet rebellion against the humiliation I had suffered. I changed, not in appearance alone, though the reflection in the mirror was proof enough of a new confidence. I became someone who could command attention without demanding it. My voice, once soft and hesitant, now carried authority. My posture, once slouched with insecurity, was unyielding. People noticed, people respected me. And slowly, I began to notice something even more intoxicating. My family had stopped noticing me entirely, until I allowed them glimpses of what I had become. The first step of my revenge wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. I positioned myself in circles my sister and parents had never imagined me entering. Invitations to industry events, social gatherings, and charity galas became opportunities to exist in spaces where my sister's influence didn't reach. And yet every appearance was a whisper in her world. I am no longer invisible. Then came the real work, demonstrating value and influence in ways that mattered to those who had once humiliated me. I invested my time and energy into building connections, cultivating respect, and excelling in every endeavor I pursued. I learned the art of being indispensable, the subtle power of quiet competence that commands attention without needing applause. My sister, who had once dominated rooms with her charm, now found herself overshadowed not overtly, but by the inevitability of my presence. I remember the first moment it truly struck her. We met at a family dinner, our first real encounter since the wedding disaster. She greeted me with a smile, but I noticed the subtle tightness in her jaw, the faint flicker of doubt in her eyes. She had expected me to be timid, to fumble under the weight of her gaze, but I walked in confidently, my head held high, my demeanor calm yet magnetic. Conversations flowed toward me. Compliments, not ridicule, followed. I could see the shock simmering behind her laughter, the recognition that she no longer held the stage. My parents, too, began to feel the shift. My father's approving nods had once been directed solely at her, my mother's laughter once at my expense. Now, they found themselves caught between admiration and a vague unease, noticing that I had become a force they could not easily categorize. I didn't gloat, I didn't need to. My transformation itself was my message, louder than any words I could have spoken. I also started laying the groundwork for poetic justice. I observed my sister's vulnerabilities, noting moments where her pride could be challenged without cruelty. Opportunities would arise, carefully, strategically, circumstances where her hubris could meet consequences she hadn't anticipated. My revenge would not be a scream. It would be a quiet, elegant dismantling of the power she had used to humiliate me. And yet, I maintained control over my emotions. I refused to let bitterness consume me. My aim was not destruction, but balance. I wanted her to see what she had tried to deny me, that I was capable, resilient, and unbroken. My parents, too, needed to witness the results of their laughter, not as punishment, but as a revelation of what they had underestimated all along. By the time I looked in the mirror one evening, I barely recognized the person who stared back. Gone was the shy, trembling girl of the wedding night, replaced by someone who could navigate the world with poise, intellect, and a quiet edge of danger. I smiled softly, knowing that the moment of reckoning was approaching. The stage had shifted. The pieces were in place. And soon, the humiliation that had once defined me would be reversed in the sweetest possible way. Silently, elegantly, and irrevocably. I had become someone my sister, and even my parents, could not ignore, and the best part, they would only realize it when it was far too late to change. The day I had been waiting for arrived quietly, without fanfare, as if the universe itself conspired to let my moment unfold. Naturally, my sister's latest social event, an extravagant launch party for a business she had built on charm and connections rather than real substance, was the perfect stage. 120 guests were expected, a crowd eager to celebrate her perceived success. I arrived unannounced, not with malice, but with a calm confidence that immediately turned heads. She spotted me across the room and froze, just for a fraction of a second. Her smile faltered. The recognition of my presence hit her like a sudden chill. Gone was the timid shadow of the wedding night, replaced by someone radiant, commanding, and undeniably influential. Conversations slowed around her as people naturally gravitated toward me, drawn by the quiet magnetism I had cultivated over years of focus and perseverance. I approached her table with deliberate ease, my steps measured, my posture flawless. "Congratulations on the launch," I said, voice smooth, warm, and utterly controlled. "I've heard a lot about it." She blinked, searching for any sign of vulnerability, but found none. The whispers of admiration circulating around me were unmistakable. I had become someone who could not be ignored, someone whose presence carried weight without demanding it. As the evening unfolded, subtle reminders of her own misjudgments emerged organically. A key investor she had sought attention from approached me first, seeking my insight on a project. Colleagues who had once admired her flattery now turned to my advice. Every acknowledgement I received, every nod of respect, was a quiet demonstration of the power I had cultivated while she had remained focused on appearances. She tried to intervene, attempting to redirect attention back to herself, but it was too late. Her attempts at dominance were met with polite smiles, gentle deflections, and the unmistakable recognition that the room had shifted. I did not need to humiliate her overtly. The reversal of roles was evident to everyone present. I had transformed the laughter and whispers that once tormented me into a mirror, reflecting back her own vulnerabilities. When our parents arrived, I felt the satisfaction of subtle justice. My mother's eyes widened slightly, and my father's hand twitched nervously near his chin. They had expected me to remain in the background forever, a passive participant in their amusement. Instead, I stood at the center of influence, calm, composed, and undeniably significant. I caught their gaze and allowed a slow, measured smile to play across my lips, not cruel, but victorious. They understood, in that silent exchange, the truth they had ignored for so long. I was no longer the girl to be laughed at. Later, as the party drew to a close, I found a quiet moment with my sister. There were no harsh words, no screaming, no public spectacle. I simply looked at her and said, "I hope you've learned something about underestimating people, about respect, about family." She swallowed hard, her bravado stripped away, leaving only the realization that she had lost the control she had once wielded so effortlessly. I left the event with no fanfare, no triumphant announcement, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the balance had shifted. I had turned my humiliation into fuel, my parents' laughter into motivation, and my sister's cruelty into a lesson in humility. My revenge was complete, not in the noise of drama, but in the undeniable reality of my transformation. As I walked home that night, the city lights reflecting softly on the pavement, I felt an unfamiliar lightness in my chest. The pain of the past lingered, of course it could never be erased, but it no longer held power over me. I had risen above it, reshaped myself, and claimed my dignity. And in that triumph, I found something more profound than revenge: peace, self-respect, and the knowledge that I was finally free of the shadows of their laughter. For the first time in years, I smiled not with bitterness, but with quiet pride. I had survived the storm of humiliation, and in doing so, I had discovered my own unstoppable strength.